All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this month's edition of African Liberty webinar. My name, as usual, is Ibrahim Anoba. I am the editor in chief at African Liberty. So this month we are discussing trade as it relates to the realities of young women on the continent, and we have with us two amazing analysts. First is Dr. Romy Klimke. I hope I pronounced that well.
It's Klimke, but Klimke is also absolutely fine.
Klimke, Dr. Romy Klimke, who is a senior legal researcher and lecturer at Martin Luther University at Halle-Wittenberg. In March 2024, she published an article on gender as a trade concern under the African Protocol on Women and Youth in Trade. She currently serves as the representative of the Chair of International Law, European Law, and International Relations at Dresden University of Technology in Germany. Welcome, Dr. Rami. And we have Appiah Adomako, currently leads the Consumer Unity and Trust Society International West Africa Center. As a director, it delivers lecture on trade and development, trade facilitation, competition policy and law, private sector development, investment, intellectual property, economic policy, and capacity building for state and non-state actors on trade and development, investment, and economic governance. Welcome. Is Appiah right, or should I just stick to the last name?
Yes, Appiah is fine.
Appiah. Thanks, Mr. Appiah. Welcome. Okay, so I was going through some data before we came on. I was looking at the recent estimates from the International Finance Corporation about uh, female entrepreneurs on the continent. They did a study about female entrepreneurs on the continent, and they found that, in fact, Africa has the largest number of female entrepreneurs in the world, which is 24%. So that was kind of, I don't want to say surprising, but I think the number was higher than than I expected. So it says something about young women on the continent that even though they might not be at the realm of making finance decisions for countries, they are very active entrepreneurs, so active that they are the largest in terms of global estimates in concentration of female entrepreneurs. So I don't know if that reflects the reality of African women generally, or because a lot of people will say scholarly data or academic data is one thing, reality is another thing. Do you think we have, or we can, or you sense this large number of female entrepreneurs existing on the continent? Because if that's the case, then it's a positive. I'll go first with Dr. Romy, then we go to Appiah.
Yes, this is a very interesting finding, and from what I've read, it's absolutely true, and it's very, I think, very positive to start with such a with these numbers, Ibrahim, because it tells us that um, young women are so promising for the African economy, right? And trade policies should be absolutely interested in improving and enhancing their potential and opportunities as much as possible. But then, of course, we should also talk about the challenges, and I think we are going to get to that in a few moments.
Yeah, I just was wondering if we could start on the positive note. But a segue from that, Appiah. So if majority of the foreign affairs or foreign trade or trade ministers on the continent are men, and you have this large proportion of women in trade on the continent, that's a mismatch. How do we correct that mismatch, or is it a problem at all?
Well, okay, thank you very much, and good afternoon to and evening to all our viewers and listeners. I think that Africa, we know, is a society which is a patriarchal society dominated by men in the leadership, though the women numbers outnumbers that of men. But it is not wrong. I mean, the data by IMF and other data shows that women are more involved in trading than men. In Ghana, for example, when we talk of food trade, it is the women who move from the big cities and go to the rural areas to go and bring the food. They risk their life, sit on rickety vehicles and transport the food into the cities. And so these women are called entrepreneurs. They are not the entrepreneurs in the sense of what you find them in Silicon Valley or in London or in Dusseldorf or in Paris. But in African sense, they're entrepreneurs, they are doing business, they take risks. And let me tell you one thing, entrepreneurs must take risks. Sometimes they may want to go and bring perishable food from the farming communities to the cities. Sometimes they drive close to 400 miles to bring the food to the final destination. In the process, the cars break down, and then the perishable food get perished, and they lose their money. So there are more women entrepreneurs in Africa. Now, we have most of the trade ministers are more of men than women. But for Ghana, our trade minister we have is a female trade minister, and it's very, very encouraging for us for many years. That is one to start. But subsequent to that also, we must also understand that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement has also created a protocol on women and youth, and it has seen the need to address the issue of gender. And so they want to make sure that all the impediments and structures that restrict women from trading and doing their businesses in the continent must be addressed, and through this protocol. The protocol places a mandate on government, local government, regional government, and the continental government to remove all barriers, any discrimination that hinders female trade, and that of also youth as well. Thank you.
Right. So before I go to Dr. Romy, I want to remind the audience to please post your question in the Q&A box, and we'll be sure to bring them up. So Appiah made mention of the fact that a significant portion of African women are in the agriculture sector. In fact, a recent data by the WHO says 50% of the labor force in agriculture in Africa are women, which is not surprising. However, Dr. Romy, many people will say if majority or the overwhelming majority of who you call an entrepreneur women or women entrepreneurs in Africa are in agriculture, then that is not what you consider as entrepreneur globally. Many people have criticized that and say, well, it's agriculture. They're not starting some tech businesses or some clothing line businesses. It's mostly in agriculture. And people have used that debate to relegate the proportion of women entrepreneurs on the continent. Do you think that kind of discrimination is the reason why women entrepreneurs are not taken seriously on the continent, because majority of them are in agriculture?
Well, first of all, thank you for the question, Ibrahim. I think it's a very important one. But I think we shouldn't underestimate the importance of the production of commodities and of raw materials and of food, right? And the World Trade Organization acknowledges this sector in the economy specifically by having an agreement on agriculture. So agriculture has always been a vital part of not only domestic economies, but also of trade. And this is precisely why it has been addressed by the WTO. And I wouldn't say that we shouldn't take women that work in agriculture any less serious than other businesswomen.
Okay, so a little follow up on that. How do we then make the case for having women represented in conversations about trade? I mean, Appiah mentioned that, Ghana's case, the trade minister is a woman, which is a great thing. But for many of African countries where you have the economic, there's a word we use for the economic cabinets. For example, in Nigeria, it's almost 100% men. How do you then advocate for the representation of women in those kind of discussions, those high level trade discussions? Dr. Rami, then we go to Appiah.
Yeah, thank you, Ibrahim. So representation and having a voice is a huge issue for feminist trade policies. And so whenever I look at trade through a gender lens, I use a methodology that in Europe, and I think nowadays also in Canada and in other countries, in foreign feminist policies has been anchored as the so-called 3 Rs, which refers to rights, representation, and resources. So this means that representation is a vital part of any feminist foreign policy and also a part of the feminist trade policy, or should be a part of feminist trade policy and any trade policy for that matter. And I think to make sure that women's voices are in fact heard, we should be very clear with regard to the modalities of women's representation. And Appiah Adomako has already mentioned the FCFTA's protocol on women and youth in trade, which establishes a committee on women and youth in trade, which is already in operation and very busy from what I gather. And this is, of course, a very laudable step, first of all, to have such a committee dedicated to women and youth in trade. But there are also other committees in the AFCFTA, and evidence tells us, in fact, that while the participation of women does not necessarily lead to more gender-responsive policies and solutions, without them, there will probably be no more progress at all in terms of women's empowerment. So this is why I personally advocate for quota systems for the representation of women in all committees as a helpful tool to really institutionalize and clear the modalities of women's representation.
Right. So your mention of the quota system brings up an interesting question regarding the future of DEI, and many people have said, it's some form of discrimination against people who are as qualified, because if you want to include a quota of women in a setting, then you're pretty much saying if men are equally as qualified or even more qualified, then they wouldn't make that space reserved for the quota. I would like for you to have a response to that, Dr. Rami, after Appiah's next comment. So my question for you, Appiah, is that you mentioned that at the start of your salvo that Africa is a very patriarchal society. Yeah, modern Africa, contemporary Africa is very patriarchal. That's not always, it's not always the case. But if this is the current reality, how first of all, do you see these contemporary cultural practices, this patriarchal bend, to be a problem? Because you said Ghana as a woman finance trade minister, and if it is a problem, what are the policy changes that we could pursue to normalize?
Okay, so I think I don't see it as a problem because sometimes you can even have all women in government, and they say that women are the, sorry to say this here in Africa, women are their own enemies. Some people say that. So, but what is required is law that brings about equity, fairness, and justice. That is not specific gender, that is not gender bias. And so when but of course, knowing well that most African countries do not have laws that even permit women to own properties. Ghana, for example, until 1983, if you are a lady and you lose your husband, for example, and your husband did not make a will, your husband family will come and eject you from the house, and eject you and the children from the house, and they will come and possess your properties. Now, it took a government that was even a military regime in 1993. They passed the interstate succession law that says that if you are a lady and your husband dies without a will and he has a property, the first line of property goes to the wife and the surviving children. And if he has additional properties, and then the family may be considered. And so I think what's more important is, one, having a regulatory framework that protects women, children, and everybody in the society. A law that does not discriminate against anyone. That is the first place to start from. And secondly, of course, it's also when we have more women in governance, it also serves to encourage women to also strive for higher position. In Africa, things are a bit different. But when a lady or young girl, a student sees a lady as a prime minister, in fact, Ghana, for example, for the first time, we have a vice president who is a female. She was the first female university vice chancellor, and then she also became an education minister, and now a vice president in Ghana. And so all of these things they serve to create a enabling environment that assures women and even marginalized people that, look, well, if you work hard, for example, you can also get promoted within the scheme of things.
Thank you. So yeah, your response, Dr. Romy.
Thank you, Appiah. I really agree with much that you said, and I find it very interesting to hear your opinion and your perspective on all of these matters in general. So really, thank you very much for the exchange. That is very important, and once again for the invitation today. It's so interesting to listen to your accounts. However, coming back with regard to the question of representation and how do we get women into those positions where we can actually have their voices heard. So I agree with you, Appiah, that if somebody is really applies herself or himself and wants to get into a certain position, this perhaps can be done. But the general problem that we still discuss with regard to gender disparities is what we call the glass ceiling. And I think it was in another webinar hosted by you, Ibrahim, where you also discussed matters in general on gender and gender disparities and gender equality, where somebody mentioned this picture of the sticky floor and the glass ceiling. And this is still such a troubling reality nowadays, not only in Africa, but in most countries, really in almost any country in the world, to have this glass ceiling. And this is why we need quota, especially for these high-ranking committees. And I think the aspect that you mentioned on quotas discriminatory. It depends on the exact design of the quota, right? But we do not have to have like 50% quota. We do not even have to have 40% quota. 30% would be absolutely enough in some, like for instance, companies, but also in some government entities. And then how these quotas work is usually that you have two comparably qualified persons, a male and a female, and then you take the female for one of these positions of the 30%. And this is not discriminatory. It's just one way to break through this glass ceiling.
Yeah. Okay, so I want us to discuss that further. And for the audience, you can keep bringing up your questions. I'm going to get to them towards the second half of the conversation. But considering the trajectory of DEI debate right now across the world, more so in the global north, the issue of quota is coming under huge scrutiny. And that discrimination argument is one people are making, but also the idea that for us to make headway, we have to elevate one category or demography over another just does not seem to resonate well with many people. And I think for young people like those listening to this webinar, there has to be a stronger argument that we should be able to make to defend our point. So I was wondering if there are other points or other kind of justification that we could, you know, promote to counter the current narrative that such things as having a quota for women in representation in politics is gone, that the glory days are over. What do you think, Appiah? Do you think, first of all, do you think it's something that is worth pursuing? And if so, what are the justifications we need to have? And if Dr. Romy has any additional justification to give.
Sorry, there was a moving airplane here, so I couldn't. There was a sound of. Can you repeat your question again, please?
Yeah, the question is about the quota system. The argument that we need quota system to bring more women into the boardroom, into politics generally. And of course, you're aware of the current backlash that, DEI, the quota system, has been getting globally. And I was wondering if you have new arguments to back that suggestion.
Okay. So thank you very much. I think the quota system is very, very important. Africa is a continent, as I said, that is dominated by men in decision making, that women for many years were sidelined. And to do so, to address those issues, you must deliberately give women access, even if through the means of election, they seem not to be electable. Because, for example, when a woman contests for election, she needs money. And if you are not financially endowed, you cannot compete with a man who is rich. And so the system should ensure that we provide support for women and give them access, equity. So I believe that we need to provide support for women into places, employment and other things. The DI has faced some push out by the right conservative. But I think that in Africa, we have to do so to create an environment to allow women to succeed. One of the Ghana's a distinguished Ghanaian educator, he said that if you educate a man, you educate an individual. But when you educate a woman, you educate a nation. So if a woman gets education, all their children will go to school. But if a man even gets money, he doesn't care. He can just waste the money around. But for a lady, once a lady becomes educated, so we need to make sure that DI and Ghana, we are past our affirmative action there to ensure that affirmative action is practiced here in both workplaces, in government positions, and what have you. We have Ministry of Women and there's a Ministry of Gender and Social Protection in Ghana. All these things are to ensure and to protect the interests of women and to address the years and centuries of cultural tendencies that restricted women access to various places and positions. Thank you.
Dr. Romy.
Okay, perhaps I would like to link this question of do we need quotas? Does it make sense to have quotas? Is it fair to have quotas to this area of trade that we are discussing today? And I think, so my main argument for not only quotas, but for having institutionalized systems of representation for women is that trade as such is a gendered area. It's not gender neutral. And this is what, for instance, feminist economists have been telling us for at least 2 decades. And still the main assumption is that trade is gender neutral, but it is not. And the general reason for this assumption, this wrong assumption, is that it has traditionally been a male-dominant area, and female perspectives have been traditionally neglected. And this is why we need to bring female voices in. And quotas can be one way to do that. So I'm not saying this is the only way, but I think it could be part of the solution in this general framework of having rights and representation and resources, which are two other areas that we could also discuss today, if time allows.
Yeah, sure. So the reason why I was pressing that quota question is because of a recent development in Nigeria, and I'll put up the data. So recently, I think it's the Bank of Industry in Nigeria or whatever, they reviewed that there are 25 major banks in Nigeria, for example, and 10 of those banks have female or women CEOs. And this is 2024, but in 2019, there was just one female CEO. So between 2019 and 24, a space of what, 5 years, we moved from 1 to 10 CEO. And I don't think the Bank of Industry in Nigeria or the Union of Banks have a quota system that brought these women there. So people have said, well, we pushing quota system in government spaces, but you look at the private sector, things seems to be fixing itself. Is that overstating it, or are we, far from the reality because we see this kind of data coming from Nigeria? Does that mean it's reflective across the continent, or what does it suggest to have this kind of this drastic change? For example, in Nigeria, Dr. Romy, then we go to Appiah.
Well, unfortunately, Ibrahim, I don't know the exact conditions and background in Nigeria, but I think it's a fascinating development to be sure. And I think perhaps we can make similar observations in many other economic areas around the world. But you have already also mentioned the backlash that feminist endeavors are currently facing, perhaps more than ever, in the past few decades, compared to the past few decades. So, of course, there may come a time where institutionalized systems such as quota are no longer necessary. But I think, especially in the area of trade, this is still something that we should discuss in order to, and also thinking about the AFCFTA and its committees, in order to properly mainstream female concerns and female needs and interests across all the areas of trade.
Right. So, Appiah, do you stress the point about this rising presence of women in Ghanaian politics? I wonder, does that also translate into the private sector? As we've seen in Nigeria here, this ascendancy of women to becoming CEOs of major banks. Are you seeing that movement from the political space to the private sector in Ghana?
Yes, I think that also one thing I also forgot to mention, that women are also rising largely on merit, not on DI nor quota base. Because if you give a woman, a lady, a girl a good education like man, she'll be able to compete with men and get. So people are rising there largely on merit, which is good. And where necessary also, DI needs also to be encouraged. I don't think there should be any pushback. And in Ghana, for example, one of the major telecom operator, Telecel, is headed by a woman, and she's done very well. There are a lot of banks that have the CEO women, and they are all doing well. And all these things are indicative of the fact that when women are given opportunity, they can also shine. And the problem that African society had, women have got different role. When a lady gets married, she gets a baby. She can't run like a man who can be at work 24. And this needs to acknowledge as a society, as a contribution to the society. And gradually, all of this narrative, the old antediluvian, the colonial mindset, that traditional African, African men had over women are being rewritten with the modern realities through equal access, equal and fair opportunities for everyone. Thank you.
Right. So we are in the second segment, and to usher that, I want to read a comment by this attendee. They say, my question is for those countries where leadership is not representing women, can the men leaders start putting women into consideration for being competent for opportunities, which is what Appiah said, competence, and not only that, we're giving them the opportunity, but a lot of women are actually rising on merit, such as government contracts. And they go on saying, in trade, bias is still prevalent for women, despite the laws that are already in place, because most female businesses in Africa run on basic income. Very good point. And losses, survival. They barely escape poverty despite owning a business. Interesting commentary. So for the audience, please bring in your commentaries or questions by using the Q&A function. I would like to have your input. Now, coming off that comment, and also part of what Appiah said about opportunity, we know that the African cultural space or family space is different from across the world, at least. And averagely, a woman in Africa, as unfortunately for now, we're still expecting some. There are still some cultural expectations that you have to give birth and stay at home, take care of your kids. Even if you're working, you still have to be the primary caretaker of the children. So this seemingly familial and kind of, should I say, biological expectations are limiting the way women can actually compete with men fairly in terms of time and availability. Do you think this is a real problem in the first place? And if it is a real problem, how do we then create a condition where women can actually have almost equal time to compete, almost equal time to have to give attention to business endeavor and whatnot, and not always have to worry about being a wife, being a mother first, and then trade or entrepreneurship comes second or third? Dr. Romy, if you may respond.
Yes, thank you. Perhaps I can start with a general observation and then give Appiah the chance to add something to that, and then perhaps I add some other thoughts, because this is a very broad topic. I think, well, usually this area of, or this question of cultural and social norms that we have now touched upon, I always think about the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Women, or to be more precise, against the discrimination of women. And so CEDAW in short, which tells us that states parties, which are nowadays almost all of the countries in the world, so CEDAW enjoys a universal or almost universal ratification status. And CEDAW tells us that states have an obligation to eliminate or combat harmful stereotypes and to advocate against traditional cultural harmful role models and ideas of how women should be, how men should be. So this is basically a norm and obligation that's at the heart of CEDAW and at the heart of the women's rights movement all around the world. And these persistence of harmful cultural and social norms, of course, leads to so many other questions and challenges that young women traders nowadays face in Africa, and women in general face, like the lack of education and skills training, difficulties in networking, difficulties once again in accessing political representation, and so on and so forth. And perhaps now, Appiah, you might like to add to that?
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much for I think, I mean, you rightly said there is a natural expectation of a woman. Like when a woman gives birth, she needs to go on maternity leave for 3 months. Even in Ghana, we are trying to amend the Labor Act to allow women to go for 6 months with full pay. And you can also even take up to one year off from work and still come back and be able to take your place. And this because the society has seen the role that women have to play. And these things are natural. That we have to recognize it. And you must also understand that we were created differently. I mean, biologically, physiologically, and you cannot have the same expectation because even when a lady is married and she's at the workplace, she can't stay in the office from 8 to, let's say, 8 p.m. because she may have to go and take care of the kid. She may have to go and do other things. But a man can stay home because culturally, men in Africa have little role chores to do at home. But the same thing cannot be said of women. And so when these nuances exist, then we must also try to address them in a way that we do not bring about difficult things on our women. I mean, we should not do things that will disadvantage them in their career. There's a story that a lady went for an interview, and one of the HR ladies saw the lady was pregnant, and then meanwhile she topped the interview, but they didn't give it to her because the woman felt that, look, I'm not going to hire you to come here for 4 months and take a maternity leave for 3 months, and I'm still going to pay you. All these things are discrimination against women, and that is why specific laws are being put in place to address all of these gender-based discriminations. Thank you.
But Appiah, so we've been dealing with the same problem for ages, and there have been numerous policies. I mean, Ghana has passed different policies. Nigeria the same, South Africa, but we keep seeing this idea that it's just a risky thing to hire, for example, a pregnant lady, because then she comes in, she gives birth, she goes to maternity, it affects production and whatnot. So if we keep complaining about all these problems, what are the specific policies? Because we've had, as I said earlier, different policies trying to address this. Nothing has really changed. What are we supposed to be doing to make it easier or more comfortable to have, for example, be able to hire, a pregnant woman and not having to bother about, are they going to be going on maternity leave and whatnot, or, to give women equal access as any man and all that. So I live in the US, and you primarily just cannot, when you sign in, I forgot something regarding labor contract. There's an aspect that says you cannot deny somebody a job primarily based on their gender, religion, sex, whatnot. And that gender already carry with it, maybe she's going to be pregnant or not. You can't just deny someone a position because they're pregnant. You do that, you're going to go against the law. I don't think many African countries have, and even if we do have that, we just do not. I've never gone for a job interview in Africa and I see that kind of statement written in the book. What do you think we need to do differently to maybe enforce these laws or reshape these laws in such a way that they ease access for women? Dr. Romy.
So yes, let me start from here.
Hold on 1 second, Appiah. I want Dr. Romy to go. Then.
Okay.
Please, Appiah, go ahead.
Okay, Appiah.
Okay. So there's also that's the problem when in the US, when you go for interview, don't ask, don't tell. Too much information about you during recruitment may also end up becoming a disadvantage to you. So America make more use of your resume instead of your curriculum vitae. Your resume looks at a resume doesn't ask you to provide vital statistics, your age, gender, marital status, race, and whatever. But in Africa, for most countries, we ask you to send your full details, CV, curriculum vitae. And all of these things provide a bit of information that recruiters can use to discriminate against you in the hiring places. So until we shift away from these things that brings about discrimination through the hiring process, we would. But of course, even if you do not provide such information, nowadays our details are littered over the internet through the social media. So they can also go to the social media and track you and use whatever they are seeing on social media to also either qualify you or disqualify you. So it's a big issue, but I think that the law should be clear that if you are a lady and you realize that you've been if during recruitment, if there's a reasonable belief, I mean, let me put it in quote, reasonable belief that your HR manager had discriminated against you because of your gender or being a female and being a expectant mother, I think that maybe the law should allow such a person to bring a reasonable course of action against the person that did that. And that alone will also, once we make the law works, I'm sure that recruiters, I mean, last 3 years, I was on an interview panel here in Accra, and a lady came and she had a daughter, I think 5-month-old daughter, and so the nanny was taking care of the lady and the baby at the foyer. And one of the guys asked, "Which lady came with the daughter here? Does it think that this place is a daycare?" And I was very, very disappointed about that person. So, but eventually, when we did the interview, the lady she topped, and I insisted that she's giving the job, and she's been working very well. So somebody would have just used this gender thing, the natural role of a lady taking care of the child of an infant to disqualify her. And I always been telling my colleague male guys that look, we are the one who make we marry ladies, they have children, and yet the men want to use that one to discriminate against them. That is very unfair. And I think that we need to improve, we need to enhance the narrative in a way that will be able to cure all of these misconception against gender.
Yeah. So just to echo, moving from empathy to actually enforcement could change things. Any addition, Dr. Romy?
Only very briefly. So I'm not a labor law expert, but I absolutely agree that there should be laws in place to prohibit these kind of discriminatory treatment of pregnant women, and not only anti-discrimination laws, but also actual opportunities to bring these claims before competent courts. But this is only like the legal part of it. We also need supportive frameworks. We need, if we're talking about pregnant women, several months later, we will need childcare facilities that are affordable and have enough place for all of the children and all of the mothers that actually want to make use of these facilities. So this is another thing, and this is where also the resources part of my threefold methodology comes into play. Whenever we adopt laws that shall help enhance gender equality and shall empower women, we also need to have supportive frameworks in place.
Great. So not only enforcing laws, or sorry, putting laws in place, but also enforcing them, but also actually providing resources that will make life easier. Okay, cool. So as we draw to towards the end of the conversation, I want us to finish on a mythical end. So there is this myth, I think Appiah brought it up very briefly, but it's very prevalent in Africa. The idea that women are women's problem. In business and politics, women are the reason why women are not progressing in terms of becoming CEOs or becoming trade ministers or whatnot. Appiah, do you think that is a founded claim or is it mythical?
I I think most of these things are mythical, and currently the grounds are shifting, and we are coming to realization that these things were wrong, and that we need to make sure that women and gender, the discrimination against women are unfounded, and are giving women the same access to education, resource opportunities, they are more able to do better. I mean, I've studied a lot across various jurisdictions, and I've come across fantastic women topping classes and courses and what have you. And women are nowhere near where the women stands in terms of this competencies level. So I think that if we remove all the cultural impediment against women and the societal stereotyping, women will be able to do well going forward. Society gradually will make a lot of progress if we unlearn all of these things.
Thanks. Dr. Rami, myth or not?
I'm not absolutely sure whether I understood the hypothesis.
Yeah,
Could you
So,
please?
so in Africa, there is this say whenever, for example, a woman competes for a public position or politics or business, whichever, and she doesn't get it, they'll say, "Oh well, our fellow women did that wrong," because actually many women will say, "Well, I cannot vote for a female vice president or a female president because she's just not going to be as good enough as a man." So that myth has endured, and I was wondering, have you heard about that? Is it true or not? And even if, regardless of whichever way, how do we deal with such assumptions? In addition to
You
what I
may,
heard.
you may find it surprising, but we have the same discussions in Germany, the same prejudices against female politicians. And you mentioned that you live in the US. I think it's certainly the same in the US. It was very obvious during the campaign led by Kamala Harris how we still view female politicians the world over. But in general, I think I'd respond with two arguments. So first of all, women's weakness in trade and in certain other women's disadvantages in trade and in other areas of of life. It's not only the problem of women, it's also and again talking about trade and about the economy in general. Um, Economists have actually calculated the losses that result from disadvantaging women, and they are so immense, and these losses are, well, to the detriment for all of us. And but another thing is that women certainly have a lot to learn when it comes to networking and to helping each other. And I think this is something, and this is also something that I've learned from feminist discourses in Germany with well, friends and acquaintances. This is really something that has also a lot to do with the cultural and social environment that we grew up in, and how we've been taught how to deal with fellow women. That oftentimes women regard each other as competitors and not as those that we should um, engage with in a way of networking, in a way of helping each other and supporting each other. This is certainly a problem, and this is something that we still have to work on for, well, some generations, I think.
Thanks you, Dr. Ram. Uh, to read this comment by an anonymous attendee, they say, according to the Equal Employment Opportunity laws, HR managers have to make workplace a diverse environment. Do you think that this is being respected in Africa? I think we kind of hinted at that. It's not really being respected, and uh, the second phase, apart from after making these laws available, is to enforce them according to what Dr. Appiah and Romy, Dr. Romy and Appiah mentioned. All right, so we will be drawing to a close. I was wondering, Appiah, do you have any final comments in a few seconds?
Okay. I think one thing that I want to say is that Africa needs to move away from its century head notion that restrict women from into certain positions, and that women are equal in terms of ability to do things. But though we must also understand that there are also some roles that women play so there are similarities and there are also commonness among women. And so we need to be able to understand these two things. And where cultural and superstitious belief prevent women in getting to the top of the ladder, we need laws and policies and enforcements to ensure that women are able to climb up to the ladder and be able to excel to the best of their ability. Thank you.
Thanks, Appiah. And Dr. Romy, I just wanted to maybe take a minute to talk about your research. But before you do that, I think Maclean Chanda said this is a wonderful program. I think we must change our perception about women. Women are human beings, and men didn't create women, but women give birth to men. Absolutely fine.
I love this comment. It's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, Dr. Romy, your research.
Okay, my final comments are, so trade, as any other area of life, has been structured and developed in a gendered manner. But this shouldn't leave us, or this shouldn't be a negative thing, because gender is also something that is culturally and socially constructed, and we can change culture, and we can change how we perceive men and women and the roles of women and men. And I think this is a positive thing, and we should just keep on advocating and working towards a more active role for women, not only in trade, but also in other areas.
Thank you, Dr. Romy Klimke and Appiah Adomako, for taking the time to join us today. And thanks to everyone who stayed around to listen to us. Unfortunately, we couldn't take all the questions. So I want to say thank you and enjoy the rest of your day. And we'll see you in the next.
All the best.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim. Thank you, Appiah.